We're here with former Governor Charlie Crist for a meeting with the Naples Daily News Editorial Board. We want to welcome you to our meeting here today. Our editorial board meeting is being live streamed at naplesnews.com, where we're also conducting an interactive chat. Leading up to today's event, we've invited readers to submit questions to us that they would like to hear you answer. And the most common question that we got, we're going to go ahead and start right off with that one.
Sure.
And that is, you were our Republican governor, you ran as an independent, now you're running as a Democrat for governor. Can you explain to us why your ideological changes over the period of time?
I haven't had ideological changes over the period of time. What has changed is my former party. About 4 or 5 years ago, the leadership, I should stress, the leadership of the Republican Party really went hard right, candidly, and kind of got taken over by the Tea Party. And Jeb Bush said it better than I can ever say it about today's Republican Party, that it appears to be, if not actually is, anti-women, anti-minority, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, anti-education, anti-environment. You know, that's just not who I am. And so I didn't leave the party left me. And that happens sometimes. And that's the reality of what it is. And so I'm much more comfortable, frankly, being a Florida Democrat than affiliated with today's Republican Party leadership.
You know, Charlie, on the basics of that, though, you know, size of government, role of government in people's lives, you know, self-reliance, you know, fiscal responsibility. You've had a pretty strong track record of doing certain things, particularly for the state of Florida, and state rights as it relates to federal regulations and things like that. You know, the Democratic Party is very much about centralized government, a lot more authority in Washington, D.C. How do you feel about that as you step across the aisle, though? That's meaningfully different.
Well, I'm still a fiscal conservative. You know, I don't want to waste my money or yours. Never have. I mean, that's, as you point out, that's never what I've been about. And I've always been pretty much a social moderate. You know, I don't want to tell you how to run your life or tell women how to make their decisions about their body. I never have. So nothing's really changed. The only issue really that I've evolved on, I think, in a pretty significant way is gay marriage. But frankly, I think most of America has recently. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, who are we to tell other people who to love, or for that matter, who to marry? I mean, even the Pope said as much. Who am I to judge?
Now, is it more of a change somewhat in ideology as it relates to politics, as it relates to human rights or the rights of individuals, or have you changed your personal position on marriage?
My personal position on marriage, yeah, you know, and I think the president said it pretty well a couple of springs ago in an interview with Robin Roberts, if I remember right, and he said, you know, I've been thinking about this issue lately, and I've been talking to my wife about it, my daughters about it, and, you know, pretty much had always supported, you know, people being able to have partnerships, but not formally marry, and that's where I had been. But he said, you know, lately I've come to the conclusion, who am I to tell people who to love? And who am I to tell people who to marry? And I agree with him. And I think most of our country does now.
Charlie, I wanted to ask you, you said the party left you. If you're elected, you're going to have to go govern in Tallahassee.
Yeah.
How are you going to be able to do that when dealing with your Republican colleagues? And how do you get through the legislative session? How do you get that? And what would be, I know it's a double-pronged question, but
sure,
what are your 3 specific points that you would like to accomplish, and how are you going to do that?
Well, one of them would be to be more bipartisan. It's the thing that I'm most proud of serving as your governor before. When I was there was very little partisanship in Tallahassee. It was a different tone. And, you know, it's gone back to being much more partisan now, and it was more partisan before I got there. But I worked with Republicans and Democrats, anybody who had a good idea to help Florida. And we had to, because we had a tough economy to deal with, as you remember. So how will I get along with them? Same way I did before. You know, I know a lot of those people. And, you know, I might be in a different party than a lot of them now, but we're all still Floridians first. And if I'm successful, one of the things I would try to communicate very early on is, look, the campaign's over. It was a rough campaign, but it's over. And, you know, you got sent back here from your district. If I win, I will have been sent here by the people of Florida too. And they expect us to work together to solve problems for them. and forget about our partisan differences and realize that we're all Floridians first, and we have a duty to them, and we swore to God to uphold that duty. So why don't we get about the business of doing that and let the politics go into the past.
We have a follow-up question here from one of our members of the editorial board.
Good afternoon, Governor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
When you ran for Senate as an independent and you met with us, I recall specifically you described how being an independent you felt was a really good fit for you. You weren't beholden to either party, and you felt right at home being an independent, working with both sides if necessary. How do you square that with your statement now that you're most comfortable as a Democrat?
Well, I am. I just am. I had a long conversation with Bob Graham about it. I've talked to Rod Smith about it, shortly after that race was over. And both of them welcomed me to the Democratic Party. And although I wasn't one yet, but the more I got exposed to Democrats across the state, the more friendly and the more warmly received both Carol and I were, my wife. So I just feel very comfortable with the Florida Democratic Party.
So much is about relationships. So to get things done across the aisle, how do you feel your relationships are with Republicans right now, given your history and where you are and some of your ideology changes? Do you think that people get past that to work in collaboration?
I think they do, and I'll give you an example. And this is sort of when, nobody's really paying attention or a TV camera's not on or what have you. I've run into several Republican members of the legislature in the past couple months, one just last week in Miami. Pretty significant members as well in leadership. And they've been very, very kind and receptive and courteous. And I think it's genuine. I think it's more genuine than what we see play out in the press, to be honest with you. I feel like they feel they have to put up an air. And I understand that. That's okay. I don't hold it against anybody. But I really do believe what I said before, that after the campaign's over, we'll be able to get along just fine. Not all of them. There'll be exceptions, of course. There are to everything. But by and large, I think we'll do well together.
One of the other questions that we've gotten from our readers submitted ahead of time goes back to the question of the economy. Can you talk to us about how you feel the economy will move forward better under a Crist administration in the next couple of years than it would under a Scott administration? Yeah,
well, this has been a real focus for me. The past 10 days or so, I have been on a listening tour at kitchen tables. I'm doing that again today here in Southwest Florida. And what I hear from people is that they're struggling. They are struggling with their utility bills. They're struggling with their property insurance rates, their property taxes, and they're getting squeezed. These are middle-class families that I talk to. They're not people that own private jets or, they're not the CEOs of a corporation, but they're real Floridians, and they feel left out. When I was governor before, we actually regulated utility companies, and we regulated property insurance companies to the point where their rates went down. We also lowered property taxes. I doubled the homestead exemption when I was your governor. These people are not at the table with Governor Scott. I don't know why. I just know that he doesn't go listen to them the way I do. We're all different, and that's okay. But there's a stark difference between us and who we're trying to help in Florida. And I think the one of us who will help them more is Charlie Crist, because I do listen to them, I do care about them, and I know that they're struggling. And those that are doing well under Rick Scott might make sense to you too. They are the head of the utility companies, whether it's Florida Power and Light or TECO Energy or Gulf Power, they're doing well. And the head of property insurance companies, they're doing well in Florida too. And you're paying the price, and so are your readers and viewers, and I don't think that's right.
Let's talk, Charlie, fundamentally. Philosophically, maybe there's the wealthy and there's those that are less fortunate in that regard. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, though, what are the 2 or 3 primary differences between how you will govern Charlie Crist versus Rick Scott?
I'll be much more cooperative. I'll look forward to working with Republicans and Democrats. I'll be more straightforward. We'll have a much more transparent administration than you have to deal with right now, and colleagues across the state have to deal with right now. You'll know where I'm going and who I'm meeting with instead of having my travel records redacted. I won't have a blind trust that hides my assets from you. I've always been very open about that. I'll appoint different judges, more diverse judges to the bench as well. And this is very important, I think. You know, the appointment power of a governor is a significant issue in this race at this time, because the next governor of Florida will be appointing 4 members of the Florida Supreme Court. That's 4 out of 7. And you've seen the kind of people that Governor Scott has put on the bench, pretty ideological. I never even asked people what their party affiliation was when I interviewed somebody for a judgeship. Very different approach.
What was the criteria for a judge for you?
Good heart, keen intellect, fair-minded, compassionate. That's what I was looking for all of them, really.
Thinking about legislative agenda as you as governor, then some of those things sound very good in terms of cooperation and transparency. What do you expect to accomplish? What are those 2 or 3 agenda items that you want to move forward through the legislators that make legislation that makes a difference to the citizens of Florida?
Number 1 is education. You know, we got to restore the cuts that Rick Scott has brought about in education. $1.3 billion from K through 12. That included $20 million in pre-K. Then the following year, $300 million cut from our universities. Cut Bright Future scholarships in half. It's 50,000 kids that don't get to go to college today. Most of them Hispanic and African American. I mean, education would be number 1. The environment would be high up there as well. I don't like what's happened in the Caloosahatchee River. St. Lucie on the other side. I'm going to go visit the Caloosahatchee today. I look forward to that. I think we need to work better with our federal partners with these discharges out of Lake Okeechobee. You live with it here. It's wrong. We can do better with that. So judgeships, education, environment, ethics, transparency, openness, honest, direct.
There's been a lot of conversation about education here in Southwest Florida, as you well know.
Oh, boy.
With what happened up in Lee County.
Yes, sir.
A lot of people that, when I'm out talking to them, they're starting to kind of point the finger at Tallahassee, both, you know, parents and educators, administrators. As a, you know, Charlie Crist back in the governor's mansion, how are you going to help resolve some of that so Tallahassee becomes part of the solution instead of being, and it kind of trickles down from the federal government, you know, from the No Child Left Behind legislation that started creating performance criteria that led to a lot of this testing. So how do we stop, slow down, and get it right?
I think listen more to students, to teachers, back off on the testing, you know. I mean, my last year as your governor, I vetoed a bill that really placed the huge emphasis on testing that we're experiencing today. One of the first bills that Rick Scott signed when he got there. And that's what I hear about from teachers and students, is that the learning is out, testing is in. And it's coming from Tallahassee. You couldn't be more right. They're making them do it. And that's why Lee County and other counties are unhappy about it. I understand their frustration. I understand you have to have standards. It's good to have high standards. I support that. But this emphasis on over-testing is out of control. That teachers are being rewarded or not based upon tests that are given to students they don't teach, and students they don't have in their class, and subjects they don't teach. That's wrong.
How do you connect? You were a good fiscal governor before. You understand the importance of being responsible when it comes to taxpayer dollars.
I do.
And you wanted to reduce the cost to go. Mm-hmm. How do we balance the revenue aspects of that, the outflow of cash to the schools, so that we know that we're getting a proper education, proper teacher performance, and all of that, while maintaining cost and eliminate some of the testing?
Well, maintain our standards. You know, as I said from the outset, you need to have standards. You have to have good standards in place, but not over testing. So what do you do in order to balance that out? Well, number 1, they need the funding restored. You know, you can't have a good education if you cut it to the bone, as the governor has. And so that's so obvious to me. It's almost laughable. And so we got to do that first. They have to have, you know, they have to buy all the supplies for their kids. You hear the stories I hear, I'm sure. That's not right. Some teachers had to get laid off. After school programs were cut. Some full schools were closed and shut down under the Scott administration. So you have to give it its due first. Once you do that, then you modify what they've done with the over-testing, back down on it so that Lee County can have more input, and all other 67 counties, into what's done, instead of being mandated on everything by Tallahassee. You know, they're pretty smart people here in Lee and Collier County. They serve on school boards like my dad did up in Pinellas County. They ought to have some control.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about utility bills and insurance companies. We know, is there a problem with the PSC, the insurance industry? I mean, what exactly can you do as governor to change that? Because that's one of the frustrations that folks have about the PSC having no voice in insurance companies. What specifically can you do to change that to help Floridians, as you say?
Two things. Appoint people to the Public Service Commission. You're right, they're in charge of those rates, that actually have some empathy for real people. Right now, they're lapdogs to the utility industry, and it's embarrassing. You know? Number two, the thing you do is you don't sign a bill like Rick Scott signed this year, saying the Office of Insurance Regulation cannot regulate insurance. What? That's like, really? I feel like we were on the set of John Daly, you know, and talk about what, I can't believe that something like that would happen. It's like Alice in Wonderland. Doesn't make any sense to me. So those two things at the get-go. You know, I know he's recently appointed 2 members to the Public Service Commission. They have not been confirmed by the Senate. You know, probably pull them back if we get elected and get 2 people on there that actually care about the ratepayers again, like they did when I was there. And they held the line on it.
We've got another question here from a member of the editorial board, and then I'd like to go to another question that a reader submitted. If we
Of course.
Mr. Crist, when Jeb Bush was in office for 8 years, as you remember, he cut, I think it was about 5,000 or 6,000 employees from the state rolls. And then when you were elected governor, you brought back about, I think it was about 4,000 or 5,000 hiring, you know, bringing them back. If you were elected governorship again, because I believe Governor Scott has let go about 10% of the state employees. Would you do a similar kind of thing and bring back some of those employees?
I would bring back what we need. You know, he not only has cut people from state government providing services to our people, he cut an entire agency, the Department of Community Affairs. It's gone. You know, and that's a philosophical thing that, you know, people have a right to do that when they win an election. But that shouldn't happen in Florida, in my view. I love Florida. I love the state. I love the beauty that makes Florida unique, that makes so many people want to come here. And I don't like over-regulation, but I favor appropriate regulation and protecting our environment and protecting our growth and not having sprawl. And I think one of the things we need to do is look at that agency and the notion of bringing it back instead of eliminating it. That probably would bring back a lot of good professional people who care about the state like I do and most people do. So, you know, where appropriate, I would bring them back, of course.
Here's the question submitted by a reader. If you want to be our governor, why didn't you run for a second term?
Well, we were at a time there, I think we spoke about it earlier today, where we had virtually nonpartisanship when I was governor. And I was very proud of that. We really did change the tone in Tallahassee. So we all were working together for the common good. I could see going into 2010 that element would be nice in Washington. And we didn't have it there. And so I thought maybe in a small way, if I had been elected to the Senate, I could have brought that attitude to Washington. It didn't work out. But now we're here today. And maybe I'll have an opportunity to bring that tone back to Tallahassee.
Another question back here, if we could, with a member.
As you know, healthcare is a sensitive issue in Florida, and among the many negative advertisements on TV is one equating you with Obamacare and giving the tone that it's obviously a failure or something bad. Yeah. Do you think that is the prevailing sentiment in Florida? And if so, is it right?
I don't know if it's the prevailing view in Florida. What I do know is that we have a healthcare crisis in this state, and it's been brought on by Rick Scott's lack of enthusiasm for expanding Medicaid. As a result of that lack of effort and that failure, frankly, about 1 million of our fellow Floridians, again today, are not going to get the health care that they deserve and, more importantly, that they need. It also would bring between $51 and $60 billion into Florida's economy over the next 10 years. It also would provide, by some estimates, 120,000 new jobs in Florida. Why a governor of a state like Florida, with as many seniors as we have, and a middle class that needs help, won't lift a finger to get Medicaid expanded is beyond my comprehension. I do not understand it. And so it seems clear to me that the healthcare crisis we have in Florida today is because Rick Scott hasn't gotten the job done.
Well, let's just say you're elected. How are you going to fix that? How are you going to be able to push that through?
Well, there's a couple of ways, a couple options. In Ohio recently, the governor signed an executive order bringing in Medicaid expansion. I don't know if that would work in Florida or not for sure, but I'm certainly willing to try. If not, I think bringing the legislature in for a special session and convincing them, as I did before, you know, look, we've got to forget our partisan differences and we got to do what's right for people all across this state. They are hurting and they are suffering. And as a result of that, you know, we need to work together to bring this health care to these people because that's our job, is to help them.
You at one point kind of thought the Affordable Care Act was going to be a burden on business to a degree, and some of the other aspects. You seem to have shifted a little bit, got more around the Medicaid and the uninsured. What did you learn through that process that kind of got you where you are today versus kind of where you started?
Well, the fact that it's worked out is the biggest factor. You know, it's now the law of the land. It's been tested in the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's working. You know, almost 1 million Floridians signed up for the Affordable Care Act that didn't have health coverage before. Discrimination has been taken out of what insurance companies used to do. You know, if you have a pre-existing condition, you can get health coverage now. So, you know, a lot of things have happened and transpired. It's worked out. People are pleased with their coverage. Their rates are lower than what the private insurance companies were charging before. It's a good thing.
You know, there's a lot of people, I think we all, just as human beings, feel like everybody ought to have access to good health care, and as we as a country should take care of people where they need to be taken care of. We also believe as a country the way we were built on is people to kind of take care of themselves too, because they have a personal responsibility. When you talk to a lot of people around this, there seems to be a lot of burden going on the hospitals. There seems to be quite a bit of burden on business. You're starting to see people shift to part-time work. There seems to be some unintended consequences, and this is a very complicated legislation. I mean, there's got to be, Governor, some degree of interest, though, in making sure that fundamental good business can still be sound in Florida and still provide health care coverage.
No question about
it. We cut out people in other ways.
Right, right. No, it's very important. You have to have a balance to all these things. And, you know, making sure that it's not a burden to businesses is important, you know, and making sure that people get the health care that they deserve is important. All these things are important.
So how can you've had experience on both sides of the aisle again. What is unique that you can bring to help Florida do that, and then represent a great state that's very influential federally, to help a conversation at the D.C. level to help make sure we're not, you know, we don't get left behind in some of that too, as far as local citizens and the role of state government?
Well, I just think it's important that you understand all perspectives. You know, that you're willing to listen to both sides, or however many sides there may be to an issue, and I've always tried to do that. You know, my dad used to tell us when we were kids, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Respect his ratio. Listen twice as much as you talk and you'll be amazed at what you'll learn. And by listening and understanding, you know, from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, how these issues affect people and industry and business and jobs, is pretty darn important for a governor to be a good listener.
So am I hearing you say that with your experience on both sides of the aisle, you're willing to put politics aside to do whatever's best in your personal opinion for the citizens of Florida?
It's exactly what I've always done. Let me give you an example. When I was your Republican governor, we were having a very difficult economic time with the Great Recession. Our federal partners wanted to help us through it with the Recovery Act. It was unpopular. Probably got me in trouble with my former party. But I knew it was the right thing to do for the people of Florida, so I took the recovery money. And we got through it. And we started coming out of it before I left office. And I'm very proud of that fact, that despite the political ramifications for me, I did what I thought was right for the people of Florida.
So the people that would criticize and say that for Charlie Crist, it's much more about the door to get back into politics, regardless of the party, they just misread that in terms of the switch from Republican to Democrat.
Absolutely. As I told you before, the party left me. You know, if you don't believe it, listen to Rush Limbaugh someday. It's off the chain.
I was going to ask you, so drilling is very controversial here.
What?
Drilling?
Yes, sir.
And so I wanted to ask you, what's your position on drilling, inland and offshore drilling?
I'm not a fan. I'm adamantly opposed to offshore. You have a particular issue here in Collier County that I'm aware of. I don't like, and I think you did a great editorial about it I read recently, where, you know, citizens in Collier County continue to move to the east and coming closer and closer to where some of that drilling may be occurring. That's probably not a good thing. And what else is important about this is that we're almost on the Everglades here. You know, we're talking about something pretty pristine. And the notion that there's oil drilling going on there is kind of strange to me. And so I don't favor it. I don't think it's necessary. It's not a big industry in Florida. So why are we risking the Everglades and this beautiful part of our state as a result? I mean, thank God there hadn't been an accident yet, but that doesn't mean there can't be one. And, you know, the whole fracking thing is controversial too. So, you know, I wouldn't support either.
We can go to a question that's a good segue here that came in interactively from Matt Dixon, our Capitol Bureau Chief, and that's about biofuels. And Matt's question is, Governor Scott's administration has gone in a different direction on biofuels. If elected, would you be in favor of boosting the biofuel industry, and how?
Absolutely. Well, you know, how? Several ways. You can do it legislatively. We did some by executive order. There's a number of, you know, tools by which you can get the ball rolling. We did the same, though, with solar energy and wind energy. And I think that this administration is just adverse to it. I think I know why, and maybe we can talk about that. But, you know, it's their relationship with the utility industry. But I think that, yeah, we need to move forward. We're the Sunshine State. It is absurd to me that we're not the global leader in solar energy development in Florida. And there's a lot of interest that would like to do that. But there's legislation that impedes it, that favors the current utility companies, that we have to break down those barriers and let the free market have the opportunity to succeed in Florida in the energy development arena.
Let's really shift gears. Let's talk about one of the amendments that's coming up.
Okay.
You know, you guess which one, I'm sure. Amendment 2.
I would think that the Second Amendment's real important.
So tell us a little bit about where you are with medical marijuana.
Yeah.
We know your relationship with John Morgan.
Right.
And just talk to us about it. Where you at? Where do you stand? What do you see? One of the big concerns, of course, is enforcement.
Right. I support it, strongly support it. And I support what John is doing and what he's done to help get it on the ballot. I think that, I know for him, it's an issue of compassion. Having to watch his father pass in a lot of pain, and his brother, frankly, as well, who's paralyzed, Tim, it's out of compassion for family members that he's witnessed. It's similar to me, in a way. I have a sister, I have three, but my older sister, a little over a year ago, was diagnosed with brain cancer, and by the grace of God, she's doing well, and I hope that continues, but it may not. And for people like her, or people with multiple sclerosis or other diseases, I think it's a much more compassionate way to relieve pain and maybe help appetite than some of these powerful drugs that we thrust on people, like Oxycontin. So I'm pretty passionate about it, and I support it, and I intend to vote for it, and I would encourage my fellow Floridians to vote for it.
I can ask a follow-up question on that. We've seen local governments here in Naples and Bonita Springs passing their own regulations. If the amendment goes through, this is where clinics can be allowed. These are the local regulations we'll allow them under. Are you in favor of that kind of local control, or should it be uniform across the state?
I haven't thought about that a whole lot. It would seem to me that there ought to be obviously an impact by the state, but if you have a hodgepodge of 67 different approaches to what would be a new industry, essentially, that might be very difficult for the industry to succeed. I'm just thinking with you out loud here. So it would seem to me a uniform approach might be better.
Charlie, another follow-up question to the medical marijuana issue.
Yeah.
How, if elected governor, and if that amendment passes,
Yes.
how will the state prevent and or restrict certain clinics or even quacks, you know, from just handing out those prescriptions to anybody and everybody that either has a headache or, you know, and keep it under control and not just giving, you know, those prescriptions to anybody and everybody that wants just to smoke pot?
Probably the same way we do it now, only I hope a little better. You know, we've got pill mills all over the state today, and I don't know that they're doing a very effective job of addressing that. So hopefully we'll have an attorney general who will be focused on it better. You will have a governor who will be focused on it. My dad's a physician, my sister's a doctor, my one sister, and So I understand the importance of medicine and its appropriate utilization in our society. And as your former Attorney General, I understand how important it is to have good law enforcement regulation, so that, you know, it is done right, it is done well, and it is done for people who need it and not those who don't.
You know, Charlie, locally, our sheriff here, Alan Weiss, the president of our local one of our local hospitals here in CH, as well as even Senator Richter, have all came out and said, you know, part of the concern they have with this amendment is the enforcement of it, the ability, from the sheriff's point of view, as a Schedule III narcotic, the ability of that to be enforced as it relates to how do you know someone is safe to drive. They see the the escalation of that usage into other things that get more addictive. There is medications that cure and or serve to do a lot of this that aren't in that category of narcotic. What do we say to people like that that are on the front line, that are very compassionate people as well through their own service record, that say for them, knowing the marketplace, that it's just not a good thing to do right now?
Well, everybody has a right to their opinion in this country. That's one of the blessings of democracy. And they should talk about how they feel. I'm going to talk about how I feel, and pretty passionately, as I've just done. And I think the majority of people are with us. I do.
So you think as governor, you can help them get through legislation? And you know it's going to take a lot of time away from the session.
Yeah.
I mean, so a lot of things we need to get done is going to be distracted from that. So, but you feel you can help get that pushed through in a way that still protects the local interest of the communities and the health of those communities and the safety of those communities.
Of course, of course. You know, I'm an optimist. I always have been. But yeah, I'm pretty confident we'll be able to get it done and get it done right.
Okay.
Probably won't be perfect, but we'll do the best we
Whether
can.
you were governor or before you, the Department of Children and Families continues to be racked by scandal. Children continue to die. Is it time to rethink the whole concept? I mean, what is there anything that could be done? You know, you're as former governor, now running again.
Yeah.
Is there an answer to DCF?
It is a very difficult agency, and I'm the last person who would be casting blame on others for what's happening, except that I would say this. One of the most important things that a governor has to do is put good, competent, intelligent, fair-minded people to head those agencies. And I've tried very hard to do that as your governor before. And I think we succeeded, particularly at DCF. Remember then, I was a Republican governor, and I reached across the aisle, as I would do again, and appointed Bob Butterworth, our former Attorney General, to head the Department of Children and Families. And I think he did a tremendous job. And when he went back into the private sector, I reached across the aisle again and appointed George Sheldon, who is running for Attorney General, as you know, and he did a wonderful job. And so I think, you know, who you surround yourself with and who you select for these important positions in government says a lot about, you know, how you address the kind of problems you're talking about. We have those problems today at DCF. We have those problems today in the Department of Corrections. We have those problems today in the Department of Education. There is a lack of leadership in this administration. It is incompetent. I mean, we've had 4 commissioners of education. We have deaths almost every day in the Department of Corrections. It almost looks like, you know, it's unbelievable, you know, the abuse and the scaldings that are happening in our prisons. I mean, Florida deserves better. That's why I'm running.
One of the other questions that's been submitted by a reader gets into the issue of mental health. And this mental health professional feels that Governor Scott and the legislature have not stepped up and in fact have cut funding in terms of helping those agencies that deal with the mentally ill. Where do you stand in terms of addressing the mental health crisis? Is this
I'm the opposite of Rick Scott. I think it's one of our greatest obligations. And to prove it, when I was governor before, we were addressing these kind of problems, and the budget was a big deal because of the lack of revenue coming in. And I remember specifically talking to our budget director, Jerry McDaniel, and I said, I know we're going to have to cut a lot of things because we have to balance the budget by law. And so, but there's 2 things I want you to cut the very least because they're the most important to me, and I think they're the most important to the people of our state. Number 1 is education. And we didn't cut it. And as a result, we funded education, per pupil funding in real dollars, every year more than Rick Scott has. And he's got a $3 billion surplus. So that was the first one, education. The second one, to your point, was to the most vulnerable in our society. And I said to, again, Jerry McDaniel, I said, please don't cut that area because, but for the grace of God, there go I. I'm a compassionate person. We need to protect these people. We need to invest in them. And we can't leave them in the lurch. And Rick Scott has done the opposite. I don't know why.
Got another question back here from another member of the editorial board.
On a different topic, Mr. Crist. Soon after you were elected in 2007, early 2007, there was a special session of the legislature where there were changes made to citizens insurance that made it essentially from an insurer of last resort to an insurer of for a lot of people of first resort. Citizens took on a lot of extra policies at that point. Looking back, was that a mistake?
No, I think it was exactly the right thing to do. We had skyrocketing insurance rates at the time. The double whammy going into the election of 2006 for property taxes and property insurance. They're coming at us again, and utility bills. So there's three now. But one of the things I knew we needed to address early on, I called an emergency special session to get property insurance down. And we made a lot of changes. And a lot of the insurance companies, you know, because we reduced their rates and spread the cost, which enabled us to reduce the rates, we made Citizens competitive with the private market. And, you know, companies like State Farm said, we're going to leave the state, and all that, you know, none of them left. None of them left, you know, the scare tactics that they employed. They didn't leave because Florida's too big a market, and I knew that inherently. You know, there's too much money to be made in Florida, but they had to stop gouging people. And so we made Citizens compete with them. They had to lower their rates. And the citizens of Florida, the people of Florida, got a better deal. And I'll do it again if I win.
The citizens been overexposed as a result. We've been pretty lucky in the last several years without a big hurricane. But
apparently not. We got more reserves than we've ever had. I think it worked out.
And there have been some changes made since you left relative to trying to discourage people from coming to Citizens and push them back into the private market. Would you try to undo those changes?
Well, I think what's been, yeah, I would. It's corrupt. Let me give you an example. There's a company in my hometown of St. Petersburg that's been in existence for maybe a year called Heritage Insurance. Startups, they're all over the state. They made a huge contribution to Governor Scott. They gave him over $100,000. 10 days later, or thereabouts, they got a $52 million contract from the state. Citizens' policies dumped on them without any choice by the people who had those policies with Citizens. And so we don't know much about that company, except they gave a big contribution to my opponent. You know, and that's happening all over the state. And your rates keep going up. Property insurance rates have gone up over 25% under Rick Scott's leadership. 25%. That's appalling. So they're making great money. You're paying the difference. And their coverage is less. So the way he's doing it is all wrong. So yeah, I'd have to fix it.
How exactly would you fix it? Because I want to go back to that, because that's a growing issue. Citizens is shedding policy to these different companies. There's a concern that some of them are undercapitalized, underfunded, where they need to be in an event of a catastrophe. How would you be able to address that specifically when you're going to have the ebb and flow, the tugging of the lobbyists pushing for keeping it as it is?
Because they don't influence me.
No, I know. Okay, no, I get that.
Oh.
But what would you do specifically? It says, okay, we've got to deal with this. How would you be able to make the changes to make sure you've got the right insurance companies that are capitalized correctly?
I would do what we did before. To Brent's question, I would do what we did before, and I would say, you know, number one, I wouldn't do what Rick Scott did. And I told you before, he signed a law that said the Office of Insurance Regulation can't regulate insurance. Well, what the hell is it there for? You know, I mean, you unregulate property insurance, and because they're giving you campaign contributions. I mean, it's absurd. It's awful.
We've had some pretty good weather for a few years. What's the role of the free market play in all this?
A significant role. I mean, most people are insured by the free market. It's important to have it here and to encourage it. But having said that, and having been Attorney General before, I know sometimes people are greedy. And some of these insurance companies are pretty darn greedy. Have you ever noticed how you paid your premium over and over and over again, whether it's your house or your car, and all of a sudden you have a claim and they fight like hell not to pay you? It's pretty appalling little racket they got going. So you have to have appropriate regulation to say it's okay to be in business. That's a good thing, but you got to do good business. You got to be fair with folks, you know. And when they're paying you your premiums, when they get a claim that comes up, you have an obligation and a contractual duty to pay, and not let them get away with that.
Part of citizens' roles because private industry wouldn't take on some of these policies, correct?
Right.
And then you've got the question of subsidy from the people that aren't as high risk. Then there's this question, I mean, it really plays into the Democratic side a little bit, that the wealthy are being subsidized, you know, because they've got all the big homes on the beach, right? So is there any way around that other than government involvement around the free market when people won't provide policies to
Well,
at an affordable rate?
I don't think so. You know, I think that there is a role for government. And the role of government, whether it's a police officer or a firefighter to keep your house from burning down, or a governor to regulate industries that are taking advantage of people, is to do that and carry out those duties. And that's not happening right now.
Okay, along that line of role of government, it's a good point. Talk about tort reform. You know, the current state of tort reform in the state of Florida. Is it where it needs to be in your mind, or is there some work that needs to be done there?
I think it's fine where it is right now. You know, you have to balance the rights of individuals who have been harmed or mistreated or have had malpractice put upon them with those who are providing services. And I think we have it in a pretty good place right now. You know, those rates aren't out of control for hospitals or for doctors. I told you my dad's a doctor, and I said, they're doing fine. And, you know, to the opposite side, people who may have an injury or a difficulty are getting their day in court, and they should, and it should be protected. And
on the non-economic cap, you think that legislative cap's in good place at $1 million per occurrence?
I think it's in a pretty good place. You know, you have to, every case is unique. Every situation is different. So I think you have to appreciate the fact that we appoint judges to do their job and juries to do theirs. And, you know, outside influence and meddling with what the limit ought to be, probably less of that is better, in my view.
So you wouldn't make that a very high legislative agenda in terms of session, pushing through a lot of change in legislation if Amendment 2 passes and some of these others. In your early parts of your governorship, that wouldn't be a big agenda item for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Got another question from back here. If we can hand them
I'm a fierce defender of our system of justice.
In theory, all aboard Florida sounds like a wonderful idea. An intermodal transportation system by rail for passengers, which would certainly cut fuel costs. However, I'm hearing and reading complaints that the rails are being put through where freight carriage is needed most, and that there are no stops in the cities that want them. Is this a boondoggle for one of the companies that owns All Aboard Florida, or can it be saved?
We don't know yet, is the honest truth. There are good prospects to it. You know, having rail, I think, generally speaking, is a good thing. But like anything, you got to do it right. So if the stops aren't where they need to be, or they impede traffic too much, or where they would go is too loud for small communities along the east coast of Florida, you need to take that into account before you approve the overall plan. There was a high-speed rail that I was very much in favor of that my opponent rejected. And things are ready for it. You know, we had the right-of-way in the middle of I-4. We had $2.4 billion dedicated to it from the federal government. Would have created about 60,000 jobs. Would have made Florida cleaner as well. So it all depends on how it's done. I mean, it can have promise, but if it's not done right and take into account the things you mentioned, then it's not a good thing.
Here's another reader question that talks about something that may change in Florida's future, and that is casino gambling.
Right.
Are you in favor of or oppose expansion of casino gambling in Florida?
Honestly, I'm open-minded about it. I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other. I don't gamble myself personally, and the fact of the matter is we have a lot of gaming in Florida right now, you know, everywhere. One not too far from here, as a matter of fact, with the tribe. And I know there's a lot of interest, from people who want to have, larger casinos in Florida, particularly on the East Coast, if I'm informed correctly. That has the potential to create a lot of jobs. And, so I'm open-minded about it. It's not number one on my hit list. I'm more focused on education, to be honest with you.
You talked about the DEP a little bit earlier, but sex trafficking, something you've worked on in your past career. We've learned of late that, there's been more of an issue even in the wonderful community of Naples, sometimes behind the scenes with that. We're seeing more and more across the state. Mm-hmm. Got any thoughts about what we need to do to help these poor folks that get pulled into that, and how can you as governor help our law enforcement to, protect our communities, but also at the same time have a helping hand for those that are been unfortunately brought into that kind of life?
Well, you take that balanced approach, Bill. I think that you have to have an administration in Tallahassee that will work with your local sheriff and the deputies, by the way, give them support, make sure that you have good communications. That's a big part of this issue, I think, that knowing what's going on and where it's happening can give you the opportunity to thwart it and stamp it out. And I'm sure there are ways that we can help and support law enforcement officers all over the state, as well as those that are victims in this situation. But, have good state attorneys, have good sheriff leadership and police officer leadership. But I think you also have to support the people in those agencies. And frankly, this administration's gone after them and their pensions, and they are upset about it, as well as the school teachers and firefighters, as a matter of fact. And, undermining their spirit that way, I don't think it's helpful to this issue or others like it.
Can you talk about what, here in energy, your position on nuclear power?
Mm-hmm. I'm not a strong supporter, but the thing I like about nuclear, if anything, is that it's clean, but it concerns me. I would much rather see a greater emphasis on solar and wind. We have a company in Florida, Florida Power and Light, that I am told makes more wind turbines than any other company in North America. Yet we don't have one in Florida. And that doesn't make sense to me. So I guess they're shipping them all to North Dakota or wherever they have, wind fields like that, Texas, whatever. But it behooves me that, a company that makes that many wind turbines would not open the market to allowing them to be in Florida, or solar energy for that matter. So that my focus would be much more on that than nuclear.
And dovetailing off of that, on the environment, you talked about earlier the discharges coming from the sugar facilities and so forth, the Caloosahatchee. I mean, this has been talked about forever and a day, whether it was reporters or elected officials. What can you do to try to improve the water quality here when you're up against this real battle where the industry says, well, they're not doing anything wrong?
Do what I try to do. Try to get the water to flow south. And the way I approached it, there's a great book, The River of Grass, by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And in her book, she says that the only way to save the Everglades is to buy it. And so we started about trying to buy it when I was your governor. And, we had to scale it back, but we got over 25,000 acres. And I think it was a good start. And I'd like to renew that project and get the water to flow south instead of having to have the discharges come to the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie. If you restore the southern flow the way God did it, it's a natural filter. You work with some of the agriculture interests north of the lake to reduce the level of pollutants that go into the lake and restore the water flow south into Florida Bay. You have a solution. It just takes time and commitment and leadership to do it.
So it'd be buying more acreage. Is that the point of trying to buy more?
Yes.
Where would you how would you fund that, the purchase of the land?
Through the Water Management District, the way we did it before. They have surpluses now. It can be done. But nobody's talking about it.
I think in your particular case, this is a wonderful question around what did you get wrong as governor the first time, you'll get right this time?
Probably a lot of things, but none jump to mind. I think I would have pushed through automatic restoration of rights sooner instead of waiting till the spring. Maybe would have tried to do it in January. Rick Scott has reversed that, obviously, and people can't even apply to get their rights restored for 5 years. You know, there's a value called forgiveness that's pretty important that we're taught in school and in church, synagogue, and he seems to have forgotten that one.
I've got one more question, but does anybody else have anything before I ask that final question?
The only thing I'd like to get to, Bill, is the second most common question that we got from readers when they were submitting questions, and that is what's happened to the Florida State retirement system. They've seen that it's been dismantled over the past 4 years. What are your feelings in terms of going forth with any changes to the Florida State retirement system?
It needs to be protected, you know, and I think under this governor that has not been the case. We talked about it just a couple minutes ago, how, you know, teachers that I talk to, firefighters that I talk to, law enforcement officers I talk to are very concerned about their retirement, their pension, and how it's being supported or not being supported. They were told that they would have 3% taken out of their salary to pay for it and support it. When in reality, it didn't go to the retirement system, it went into the general fund. So they were lied to, and they're upset about it, and I don't blame them. And I'd like to fix it, because I will be an advocate for them. You hear it a lot, second most, I hear it a lot too.
One more question and we'll wrap. I think that extremes in politics have certainly got a lot louder, and people are getting distracted by those extremes on both sides of the aisle, and I think you would agree with that.
Yes.
Ideology typically and our core values as individuals don't typically change a lot. You know, what we stand for and what we believe in and what motivates us is typically pretty centered when it comes to us as individuals. Mm-hmm. Personally, I got this question, and for us as an endorsement, rather than change parties, why didn't you stay and fight for those values in that party you loved for so long to make it come back more towards the center where typically the majority of people are, versus just going to the other party to try to accomplish that?
Because those values weren't valuable in my former party anymore, as I said before.
You think the party's ideologies changed, not just others have, you know, leadership may have changed and gotten a little radical, and the Tea Party may have a ton of influence. So you think in general, Republicans and the Republican values and the ideologies changed?
I think the leadership of today's Republican Party is just what Jeb Bush said. Anti-women, anti-minority, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, anti-education, anti-environment. He said it better than I can ever say it, Bill.
That may be
and
the
he's
leadership.
a pretty good way to say it.
You know, we're talking about people, though, voters.
Oh, no, there's plenty of good Republicans out there. Shoot, my mother and father are Republicans. But, you know, in my life and what I do, for me to be comfortable and to be able to speak from the heart about what my party represents and stands for, I have to be a Democrat. I have to be a Democrat.
Well, we appreciate your time now. Tell us, in your words, why we should endorse you, one, and tell our viewers why they should give you their vote.
Well, why you should endorse me, that's really a decision for you to make. But I think you would want to, because I'll be a better governor than Rick Scott. I'll be a governor who cares about you. I'll be a governor who understands your problems, who wants to fight for you again, who cares about education, who wants to protect our environment. I'm going to go look at this afternoon again. Who cares about people. You know, Rick Scott is what he is. And, you know, we're all made different. We all have our own style and our own way and things that are important to us. Money is not important to me. Never has been. I think it's very important to him. And that's okay. But it isn't okay when you steal it from people. That's what his company did. I'm an honest man. I would never stand for that if I ran a company. And I'm sad that he did. But we can fix it in about 29 days.
Is there anything specific you want to say to the viewers or our readers as we write this up that you want to get across to them to give you their vote?
Yeah, well, you know, we've talked about a lot of these issues today. We've talked about education. We talked about the environment, ethical leadership, you know, transparency, somebody that's straightforward. You know, we don't have a whole lot of time left in this election. People are voting now. They're voting with absentee ballots already. Most counties open up their early voting on the 20th of October. I would encourage people to early vote. And if you don't vote until Election Day, when you get in line, don't get out till you vote. Don't let anybody dissuade you or convince you that you don't have that right. You do. And it's precious. And I would encourage everybody to exercise it, no matter who you vote for.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the editorial board. I want to thank our readers that have submitted questions and those that have engaged with us over social media. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure.